All right. Hello and welcome back, everyone. To be honest, conditions here in the Sacramento Valley have been absolutely miserable over the last 2 weeks. I'd say we've had 8 or 9 days out of the last 10 or so where daytime high temps have been between 100 and 110. Lots of days in the 105 to 108 range. And honestly, my garden has been taking a beating. Let's take a look at the damage. So this is what happens to an unshaded garden in the Sacramento Valley during the summer. As you can see, nothing here is looking too healthy except for the sunflowers, which seem to have an amazing heat resilience to them. These bush variety butternut squash I've been growing, most of the leaves are dead. There's still a few that perk up in the cooler hours of the day, but these aren't going to do much more. I'm hoping that there is just still enough life left in the vines that the fruit that did develop can continue to ripen. So that I can at least harvest something here. It's a real shame because there were a lot more fruits developing on these vines before this heat wave hit, and it killed everything that was still in the early phases. There's no coming back from unshielded 110 degree temperatures. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. I don't know what I was expecting without shade cloth out here in the front, if nothing else. This is acting as an example of what can happen to a garden without shade cloth. Even my hot peppers out here aren't doing well. A lot of the fruits are just completely sun-scalded, not doing too well. Luckily, the black futsu squash in this bed are pretty much ready to be harvested. In fact, I had to I actually wound up harvesting them all because some of them were splitting. Possibly due to the heat or a combination of overwatering and heat. I don't know, I've been watering these beds daily. So I did end up harvesting all of these squash in this bed here, which is good to get something, but overall it's kind of not shaping up to be a great squash year for me. And here's all the squash I got so far from my front yard garden. That really almost perfect looking pumpkin was a volunteer, or possibly a seed that got mixed into the pack of butterbush that I was planting from. And the smaller ones are a butternut variety, basically a machada variety called black futsu. They're really cool. My daughter absolutely loves the way these look. She was going on quite a bit about how cool she thinks they are, so that's always kind of nice. And these two that I'm zooming in on here, this is the cracking that I was talking about earlier. Not sure exactly how that happened, but I wound up having to process those two immediately, unfortunately, before they had a chance to cure. By contrast, my backyard garden is looking pretty much fine. Nice and green, still everything is lush, and this just demonstrates the miracle product that shade cloth is if you live in a place with hot, dry, drought-prone summers. Interestingly, spots where unfiltered sunlight is able to peek through a gap in the shade cloth, like with this tomato plant here, the sun's like a death ray. You can see how many burnt out crispy leaves there are. Some of the fruit is sun scalded, and this is only getting maybe a couple of hours of actual unfiltered sunlight a day. And the plant right next to it, perfectly healthy, no real damage whatsoever. The contrast is really amazing. In a recent video, I spoke about how many of my backyard squash plants were struggling with spontaneous fruit abortions. And I think that I was able to make a change and get those plants to rally a bit. Knowing that phosphorus and potassium promote healthy blossoms and fruit, I started the plants on a regimen of this 0-10-10 high potassium and phosphorus fertilizer. While I know that correlation is not necessarily causation, after a couple of weeks of applying the fertilizer, I noticed a real decrease in the number of fruit abortions. Before the murder heat really set in and made any kind of fruit set or pollination pretty much impossible, I had about 4 or 5 of these nice healthy looking black futsu squash develop on one vine. I'm fairly confident that these are past the danger zone and are going to make it to maturity. I also decided to harvest the only 2 Maxima hybrid squash that developed to maturity this year. Unfortunately, these plants didn't really yield a lot so far. And I'm glad I did because there were compromises in the rind on the bottom. and that's an inroad for an insect. I'm really hoping that I can get this to cure before it rots. Winter squash are really supposed to cure for a couple of months before you eat them. And here's the other one that developed. So what's interesting is these were from the same unknown volunteer squash last year, but they're vastly different in color and rind texture. So that's kind of interesting to me. I'm glad I planted these, even though they did not do well this year, while the plant they came from last year did amazingly well. But I did get at least 2 neat looking squash out of them. All of my tomatoes are still going really strong, especially my heirloom slicers. In particular, these Virginia Sweets here that we're looking at now have been an amazing surprise. I was a little concerned at first that the vines didn't seem to be producing that many in terms of numbers, but what is developing is huge. These are huge fruits. I can barely fit them in the palm of my hand. So by weight, we're getting a lot out of these plants. Honestly, over the last couple of weeks, I've been struggling to keep up with these to make sure we use them in some capacity before they go bad. Heirloom slicers taste wonderful, but they do not have a long shelf life. So when you have, 10 pounds of these ripening up on a counter, it can be a little bit of a challenge to get through them before they go bad. Whatever we're unable to eat fresh, I've been running through my tomato sieve and turning into sauce. Heirloom slicers are fine in a sauce. It's just that the extra water content means you're going to be cooking everything down for a little longer. These tomatoes here are, of course, our Cherokee Purples, which have become a perennial favorite here. They seem to do really well in our hot, dry climate. I don't imagine I will ever go a tomato season again without growing at least a few of these. They just produce like gangbusters here. And my Rio Grande sauce tomatoes here just keep going and going and going. I'm at a point where I'm harvesting 40 to 60 pounds of these a week. It's honestly, again, getting to be a bit of a struggle to keep up with everything and get everything processed before it goes bad. Unfortunately, I can't be a full-time gardener. I work full-time and I'm a parent, so balancing all of that, it's going to be a struggle. It's a good problem to have, but it is a struggle. I'm estimating that these are going to finish up by early August. A lot of them, I can see some of the plants they still have fruits on them, but they're going to be done fairly soon. My concern is that you see the ones that are unripe, that are almost like still a whitish green. I'm hoping that if the weather can cool off a little bit, that those can actually start ripening and finish maturing as well. I would hate to start pulling plants when there are, perfectly good but unripened fruit on the vines. And the reason that I'm going to need the space is because I've actually started a whole second round of tomatoes for the year. So I figure, why not take advantage of the fact that Sacramento has long hot summers that lead into long hot falls, and see if I can be eating fresh tomatoes from our garden up until Thanksgiving. So I went ahead and I started an assortment of fast-yielding bush determinate variety tomatoes. All of these are said to yield within 70 to 80 days of transplant, and see what happens. It seems probably on the surface a little nuts that a guy who is already struggling and burnt out on harvesting tomatoes would go ahead and start 32 more tomato plants, but what can I say? It's an illness. Here my sweet potato beds are looking nice, lush, and vibrant, maybe a little too vibrant and lush. The super green, thick foliage on sweet potatoes can often indicate an overabundance of nitrogen, and that can mean undersized roots, and the part, of course, that we're really after are nice, big, edible roots. So it remains to be seen. I'm letting all of the volunteer plants that pop up in between stay in hopes that it will compete a little bit for the available nitrogen. And one of the volunteers actually is this really nice looking cherry tomato vine with this really nice clutch of fruit here. I didn't expect that, even though I'm over tomatoed, I will never turn down bonus tomatoes. And my Armenian cukes are thriving in the extreme heat. They're actually my only cucurbit that consistently does great in extreme heat, which is why I grow them. These two here are an example of about how big you want to let them get before harvesting. Much bigger than this, and they get seedy, fibrous, and unpleasant. My asparagus or yard-long beans are now consistently producing to the point where we're eating these as a side, a relatively robust side a couple of times a week. Really like these again for their heat tolerance and high yields. To me, they taste identical to more common green beans and string beans. These are going to remain a summer staple for us. Unfortunately, my other cucurbits that I have going just are not doing well. These Boston pickling cukes, struggling to set fruit in this extreme heat. There's a lot of blossoms there, but pollinator activity is down because it's so hot. So we're getting, the occasional handful of the pickling cucumbers. I'm debating in the future if it's worth the space. I really like the look of them, but I don't know that they do well enough to justify them. Same thing, my zucchini plants really can't set fruit in the 105 to 110 degree heat that we've been getting now for really it's 2 weeks. So that's a disappointment. We really like garden pizza that we make every Friday with zucchini slices. So there's only so much that you can do in the extreme heat of summer like this. And this is what I've been doing with pretty much all of my free time lately. I'll say again how tedious I find any form of tomato processing. It's also not a lot of fun having to have giant hot stock pots and canners going in the middle of the summer when it's 110 degrees out. But it's a sacrifice made now for the reward later. There's nothing better than being able to reach for a can of homemade tomato sauce or salsa in the middle of the winter. So as much as I hate doing this, it's definitely worth the effort. All right, that's all I've got for today. I'm tired of being outside. It's hot. I'm wearing a black t-shirt because that was my last clean t-shirt at the moment, and I really want to go inside into the AC. So until next time, let's hope it all doesn't burn to a crisp.